Today on Propaganda by the Seed Shorts, I feel like talking about string and mousetraps, because those are down-to-earth practical topics that will give me a break from thinking about the precipitous rise of fascism for 10 to 15 minutes. After that, I'll answer questions about sourcing unusual plants. But first, let's hear from our friends at the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
Hello, Inman here from Strangers in a Tangled Wilderness, an anarchist publishing collective that's been putting out work for over 20 years. We just put out a new book, and we think you're really going to like this one. Orso, Wartime Journals of an Anarchist, contains the first-person narrative of Lorenzo Orsetti, also known as Heval Tekosher Peling, now Shahid Tekosher, an internationalist soldier in Rojava. Orso's journals were originally published in their native Italian following his death, and we have the great honor of publishing the first English edition. It's through our devotion to each other that we, all of us, live forever. This memoir is a story of the everyday bravery that not only defeated the Islamic State, but proved that a better world is possible and within our grasp. That's what Margaret Killjoy had to say about the book. What will you say about it? If you want a sneak peek for free, you can read the essay Martyr Culture by Sarah Bloom, which accompanies and helps contextualize Orso's journals. You can also hear an audio feature of the essay, as well as my interview with Sarah about her essay on the Strangers in a Tangled Wilderness podcast, or Live Like the World is Dying. Find it all at tangledwilderness.org. And remember, every storm begins with a single raindrop. Try to be that raindrop. Or so.
Today's first topic is string. String is an extremely useful material to have, and if you've ever made cordage from plant material, it is totally a doable thing, but making your own string is just extremely time consuming. So we are very lucky to have access in this modern world to industrially made string that is really handy and cheap. For a long time, I used mostly string that I would salvage out of, whatever stuff was around, or whatever the cheapest string I could buy at Martin's, which is like a odd lot store around here. And eventually I got tired of using annoying tangled little bits of string and figured out what I wanted to buy in bulk, because I use a lot of string these days and it's nice to just have a bunch on hand. So there's really two kinds of string that I want to have regular access to. One is something really strong, not biodegradable, not super UV degradable, so that I can either use it for something that's going to last a long time or reuse it over and over again a whole bunch of times. A example of reuse is I have a little bag full of bits of string that are like 12 to 18 inches long and have a loop tied at both ends. And they're super handy for like hanging up stuff, bundles of plant material. Right now I have a bunch of them hanging bundles of garlic in the shed, because you can just kind of wrap them around something and put one loop through the other loop, and it'll kind of cinch down on it, and then you can just hang it off of a hook or a nail or whatever. And because those are made of a strong string that's not biodegradable, they'll probably last decades. So for that type of string, I like to use paracord. I buy it in a 1,000-foot roll, and I made a little stand for the roll. It's got a cheap utility knife attached to the stand so I can cut it, and I think that'll last me many years. The annoying thing about paracord is it tends to unravel really easily at the end, and so basically anytime I'm cutting paracord, I want to have a lighter to just melt that end so it doesn't unravel. Other than that, it's super handy. It's like 500-pound test and pretty inexpensive. I think I paid like $35 for 1,000 feet. It's also really nice to just have it on a roll. Like if I want to throw a rope over something, I'll often just grab my big spool of paracord, put a throw weight at the end, and throw it, and then use that to pull a real rope over whatever I'm trying to throw a rope over, and then just roll the rest back onto the roll. The other type of string that I like to have around is something biodegradable and cheap. And for that, I use baler twine. There's a bunch of different kinds of baler twine, but I definitely prefer the biodegradable, like plant fiber kind. It's a little bit more expensive than the plasticky stuff, but I want to be able to like use it to make annual trellises and stuff like that, tie up plants, and then when the season's done, I don't have to like pick out all the string out of that plant material. It can just all go in the compost. And it's cheap enough that it doesn't really matter that it's, a little bit more expensive. And baler twine, I think it's about $70 for 9,000 feet. So you get more than a mile of string for about $70. And that should last a really long time. As long as you don't leave it out in the rain, because it's such a big roll that if it gets really wet, it tends to rot before it actually dries out, which is a bummer. I have done that before. You also want to keep it away from mice, because mice can get into that and ruin your giant roll of baler twine. One other string-like thing that you might need is wire. Wire has many different uses, but something that I use it fairly regularly for is making permanent trellises. And for that, I like to use high tensile fence wire. I usually just use regular steel because it's pretty cheap, although you can get aluminum and stainless steel versions, which are nice because they last a super long time, but they're just more expensive. And regular high tensile fence wire is about $80 for 1,000 feet. So that's basically the gist of what I like to use for various strings. Now on to mouse traps. Rodents are a serious problem on farms and in gardens, even just around the house sometimes, depending on what your situation is. And they can be really destructive because they gnaw through stuff, and they're really gross because they just piss and shit all over everything, and it's really nasty. They can carry diseases like hantavirus, which is, somewhat uncommon, but still gross. And there's many different ways to trap them. There's live traps. But then what the hell do you do with the mouse that you caught? They have to be relocated quite far if you don't want them to come back. And animals that are relocated often don't fare so well. So I personally think the best option is to use traps that kill them. And I think the best bet really is the old-fashioned snap trap. They're cheap, they're easy to use, they generally kill the mouse very quickly. There's all sorts of bucket-based traps, but they usually rely on drowning the mice, which I think is kind of gross and fucked up. The only thing worse than that is like glue-based traps, which are really gnarly and I think a terrible option. Then there's also poison, but poison probably is much worse than a snap trap for the mouse and tends to be at least somewhat biologically persistent. There are vitamin D3 based poisons that are less biologically persistent, but still like not something that I would want to use. So I have opted for the snap trap, and honestly, I've tried a whole bunch of different ones, and the best one that I have found is the Victor Easy set. It's a pretty generic, it's like the standard wooden mouse trap. There's kind of two different versions. One has a big plastic treadle that is the trigger for the trap. That one works great. They also make a version that has a little coppery curl of metal as the treadle, and that one works terribly. So the wide treadle Victor Easy set, they cost about $1, I've found to be the most effective mousetrap. The only thing that I don't like about them is if they get wet, sometimes the staples that hold the trap together pull apart. So if you're trapping in a wet environment, I've found this in my hoop house where I trap mice because they get into everything and dig up my seeds and stuff. And for those spaces, Victor does make a plastic snap trap that is called the Power Kill, and they're still pretty cheap, only $2.50 a piece. They don't seem to work quite as well in that they just don't get triggered quite as easily, but they do seem to kill the mice just as effectively, and it seems to be a good clean snap on them that kills the mouse quickly. So those are your kind of two best options for mouse traps, in my opinion. Something you might consider in several different circumstances is putting your mouse traps inside of a box. For this, I make wooden boxes that are maybe like 12 inches square, maybe 4 or 5 inches deep, with a removable lid and just a small entrance hole on 2 of the sides. This can make the mouse traps a lot more inviting for mice because they want to go in and check out this like safe spot to hide. So that can be very helpful. It also prevents other animals from triggering the mouse trap. So if you have pets around or whatever, that can help keep the cat or dog or whatever from like getting snapped in a trap, which usually won't hurt a big animal, but then the trap is sprung and you're not going to catch any mice. Voles are another rodent that can be very damaging, and you can use snap traps to catch them as well. The best way is to put the snap trap directly in the vole tunnel. So if you've got like a bed of carrots and they start disappearing because a vole is tunneling through them, what you do is you kind of scrape back the soil from around the tunnel, set your traps right in the tunnel, and then cover it with a board with a rock on top. And sometimes it takes a few tries because the voles can often be tunneling kind of backwards, and they'll often just bury the trap. But if you clear it out a few times, then hopefully you can trap the voles that way. Vole traps, because you're setting them in the tunnel and the voles are just going to walk onto them, they don't necessarily need any kind of bait. For mouse traps, I do tend to bait them just with the tiniest smear of peanut butter, but often you can even get away without baiting them, especially if they're in a building, because the mice tend to run like right along the edges, and you can just set your traps along the edge where the mice run and catch them that way. So hopefully that is some useful information for how to best utilize the amazing gift of industrial string and to catch some mice so they don't nibble and ruin various things for you. This question comes from Gather, and thanks again for sending me a handful of softball questions.
This happens to me all the time. I find out about a new plant. I get excited about it. I do a bunch of research on it, and then I can't find any sources for it, or every source is sold out. Do you have any advice on approaches to sourcing uncommon and interesting plants?
So the first thing I would say for sourcing uncommon and interesting plants is learn to grow from seed. Growing from seed is basically always going to be way cheaper, and you'll have way more different species and varieties available as seeds than you will as grown nursery stock or starts. Then you need to figure out where to get the seeds. Recently, for me personally, the vast majority of the plants that I'm adding to my garden these days, I'm really looking for local ecotype native plants. So for those plants, if there's a species that I'm newly interested in, I would first read about the habitat that plant grows in my area, and then think about some likely spaces that I could collect seed from, and then go out and see if I can find the plant. I might also look at iNaturalist. I would zoom in on the iNaturalist map so it just shows 20 or 30 miles around me, and then search for that species and see if there's any known populations that I might be able to source seed from. That can also be helpful even if there's not. Maybe if that plant grows like on a river system, I could look on that same river in an area that's closer to me, or in an area that is that I can access seeds from. So that's useful information for collecting wild seeds. Sometimes you can find people who are collecting wild seeds. I've gotten a bunch recently from this guy, Tom Groves. You can find him on Instagram as Plants Are People Too. Real nice guy. Visited me recently and had a real fun time hanging out with him for a couple hours. And then also looking for local people who are interested in similar things. Small nurseries, habitat focused conservation organizations are all good places to look for those local ecotype native seeds. For more cultivated plants, there's a bunch of options. Obviously, you can Google stuff, but that is not always the best option. Seed Savers Exchange can be great, especially for more traditional crop plants. Dave's Garden is a gardening website that has a trade list feature. So people kind of keep track of what seeds they've saved in this sort of searchable database, and you can get in touch with people and trade seeds. I've gotten many interesting things that way. Although I haven't used it recently, I'm not sure how active that community is anymore. There is a seed bank, I guess. It basically functions like a seed catalog, but JL Hudson has a massive inventory of really interesting seeds. They're very cheap, and they have lots and lots of stuff that no one else carries. You can join many different garden clubs. For unusual plants, probably the best one in North America is the North American Rock Garden Society. I want to say it's $35 or something a year to join, and then maybe around $20-25 to participate in the seed exchange. But that gets you 20 packets of seeds. So it's pretty economical, and I want to say last I looked, there was probably around 10,000 different types of seed available on that exchange. I just checked, and it's actually more like 4,000, but still. So absolutely massive amounts of stuff that's coming out of, small gardens all over the country. a really, really amazing resource for unusual stuff. One other seed resource I'll mention is not really suitable for everyone, but is a resource that is still available. Who knows for how long? But it's the GRIN ARS network, and GRIN stands for Germplasm Resources Information Network. So it's the part of the USDA that deals with germplasm, which is like seeds, cuttings, stuff like that. And it's only supposed to be for research purposes, and it's definitely not for home gardeners and hobbyists. But if you are a professional in the field, you can often get stuff from GRIN as part of your like research and development for your home nursery or what have you. I've gotten lots of interesting stuff from there. Tons of stuff that the Experimental Farm Network sells comes from GRIN. These seeds are just, for the most part, sitting in storage facilities waiting for someone to do something with them. And there's hundreds of thousands of accessions in there of all sorts of crop plants, many wild plants too, and lots of interesting stuff. Beyond seeds, you can also get scion wood, cuttings, tubers, all sorts of stuff. So if you have a professional level of involvement in horticulture and growing, that is something to look into for sure. And worst case scenario is you ask for something and it never shows up, or they tell you that you can't have it. And it's, free at the point of use. It's all paid for by your taxes anyway. So if that's something that's interesting, definitely check out GRIN ARS.